Welcome to the Growth Whisperers Podcast, where everything we talk about, that's every single little thing that we talk about, is related to helping leaders and their teams to build enduring great companies. Companies that are successful for the long term, not just a flash in the pan, or just not here today and we'll sell it tomorrow. I'm Kevin Lawrence, and I'm here with my co-host, Brad Giles. Brad, how you doing today?
I'm doing excellent today. Excellent. Had a good weekend. Took the kids ice skating. Now, that might be something that's pretty common in Canada, but very uncommon. We've got one rink here in my state. So took the kids down there. All of us were very wobbly and quite sore, and there's quite a few bruises, as you'd imagine. But yeah, really, really enjoyed the ice skating. It was very Canadian, funnily enough. They had a Canadian bar there, and yeah. It was cool. Yeah. Yeah. So we had Coors, Coors beer.
Which I think it's American beer. Yep. Coors, okay. We would call it. You get the American accent. Coors.
Coors. Yeah. And yeah, we had the brisket, and it was all really, really good. Yeah. So good weekend, bit of ice skating for something different. And what about yourself? You doing well?
Well, I did this weekend, not this weekend, but in the past, as you know, I spent a lot of time working in Dubai in the Middle East, and I actually got to go ice skating in Dubai. They've got an amazing indoor ice rink in Dubai Mall. Yeah. So that was kind of a fun thing to do. Yeah, I had a great weekend, had some quality time with my kids. And I caught up with a friend of mine that I went to college with going back more than 25 years ago. And we did a bunch of entrepreneurial ventures together. We explored some stuff in politics together. And we were like, accountability partners for many years in terms of working out and stuff in our businesses. And we both got busy with life in the last few years. And we caught up and had dinner tonight, which was awesome. And kind of some old flashbacks to some of the stuff that we did early in our days. Oh my God. We had no money, not a lot of understanding, and a boatload of drive. and we both had different businesses, and oh my gosh, and we were reliving some of the stories, and it was awesome. So a nice little flashback, and it was a reminder of how important relationships are in our world, and we were reflecting on the critical or the key people that have been very influential in our life, post our formal education. It was awesome.
Good.
Awesome. So what do we got? What are we talking about today? What is the focus here today, Brad?
Very interesting, specific issue that you and I have both come across. So it's why hiring for experience from multinationals rather than competence might be a bad idea.
So yes, it could be a great idea. Yeah. And it can be a horrific idea.
Yeah. It could be a really bad idea. Sometimes there are these famous brands, and we put a job advert out and we get a person applying from a famous international brand, and they might be something like, a general manager or a marketing manager or any kind of role. And we think that's so awesome. They've come from that environment where they're so successful in that big company, they could do wonders for our business. And sometimes we can get a bit enamored, a bit excited about that. So we're going to talk about that today. Why that might work, but also why it might be a bad idea.
Yeah, and I, like, you have seen this be an unbelievable success when you get the right person coming from a large multinational or very, very successful company. I have seen it be amazing, and I've also seen it be amazing in the other version of it where it's a catastrophe. And I'll share a positive one first that I've seen. And I've seen it many times with finance people. So, it's interesting. This one guy, I won't say his name. I love this guy. He's a little quirky, but he's a finance guy in one of the companies that I've worked with. and he is outstanding. He worked in the big multinationals. I think he worked at Unilever and somewhere else. And it's no longer a company I'm working with. There's another guy in another company I work with that worked for Unilever and a few others, as well as a finance guy, and as a plus CFO in an entrepreneurial company we work with. But the other one I want to share with you, he's kind of an awkward guy. He's got his weird, dry humor, but he's a beast of a finance person. And the company that he's working in, between 30 and 50 million a year, solid company, and his insights and the great thinking, how he knows how to do proper management reporting and all this stuff is outstanding. Like, he is amazing. I've got another one that I'm thinking about in the Middle East that I worked with. Same thing, came from a large company and came into this more entrepreneurial environment. The client there wasn't, it was under $1 billion in revenue, but it was, still pretty substantial business. But the value they add, because they're trained so well in some of these big companies.
Yeah.
And, in finance, I love finance people that come from, because the discipline and the rigor and the analysis, and in many ways, they're a business partner.
Yeah.
Like they're not the bookkeeping department. They are a thought and information partner to the operators, and they're amazing. So I've seen a whack load of them that were just outstanding. And now it's not just because of where they came from, which we'll get into, but I've seen a lot of times when it's worked well, and then I'll share one that didn't. We hired actually an awesome guy from a large company, and I believe it was Finning. It was either Finning or Caterpillar, one of those companies that makes the big, earth moving equipment, the big dump trucks and the big excavators and all that stuff, and loaders. And he worked there. I think it was Finning. Anyways, he worked there for years, and he had been promoted throughout the company. He had all the right track record and everything. And I wasn't involved in the hire, although I heard about it, and it was a mediocre hiring process. But it turned out he was brilliant. We loved him. He was a great executive to have on the team. The problem is, he was in a business that the dynamic of the business was a 9 to 18 month sales cycle.
Yeah.
And he was brilliant there. He came into a business that was a 90 to 180 minute sales cycle.
Completely.
He went from heavy equipment to cars.
Yeah.
So when you are used to, and it's almost like if you've spent your whole life mastering bird watching, and you're the best, and now you're going to be a sniper,
Yeah.
And maybe bird watching and sniper works, right? Maybe, I don't know. But the point of it is, you're so conditioned to doing one activity. Maybe it's bird watching to basketball. That for sure would be dramatically different. Because bird watching and sometimes bird watchers are waiting for the right shot with the camera. That might be a good parallel. We can keep that in mind. But bird watching to basketball, there ain't no overlap.
Yeah.
And for him, he was in a slow, long-term, long sales cycle, because you don't sell one piece of equipment. You're selling a package of dozens in many cases. And then you go into a 90 to 180 minute sales cycle in cars. He didn't have a hope in hell. And and he wasn't a bad guy, but it's such a dramatically different environment that all that great stuff he learned, it's like it's a completely different sport.
It is. And that's why we're talking about this today, because when you've seen it enough times, you begin to think, well, it's not a recipe for success. Definitely, sometimes it can work, but every person is different. Every role is different. Every organization is different. But just because something works at the enterprise level in a multinational or an incredibly successful company, There's no guarantee at all that it'll work in your mid-market company. And I'll give you a quick example. A company that I work with hired a marketing manager from a large person who was in a similar industry, kind of the same industry, but this company was only in our state, whereas this other company where the person was hired from was global. They were all over the world. And so they came in and they put their role as being marketing manager. They came in and they were struggling. They couldn't understand the dynamics of our leadership team in the way that they needed to make decisions and not outsource things to an external party or to a committee or something like that. And that, put simply, in the mid-market, you need to move quickly. You need to be move fast and make fast decisions and back yourself. And yeah, you're not really relying on a lot of other people. So we went into a workshop, and this person, they couldn't understand. They couldn't understand the concept of strategy, which sounds a little bit remarkable, but they couldn't understand that and how that was going to work, because in their previous environment, everything that they were doing was all around one thing, which was doing what they were told. They weren't ever at the coalface having to figure out the strategy. Someone somewhere else in the C-suite was determining, or maybe even the board was determining the strategy, and then they just had to follow the bouncing ball, let's say within their cubicle.
So even though they were a marketing manager in that large, amazing company with a spectacular brand and all that stuff, they could have been a marketing manager at Tiffany's, right? Or some amazing company, but they might have been closer to just a marketing administrator or a coordinator in any other company, or like probably the most junior marketing person you could think of in your company might have been their job, where they were just merely executing strategy.
Yeah.
And because in those big companies, like they might have 20 marketing managers, right? For different regions or different product lines or whatever it happens to be. Yeah. And that's why they might, so when you ask them to work on a marketing strategy, they may have no idea, or they may have an external consultancy do it, which many cases might be the case.
And therefore their role is to execute the external company's strategy, not to figure out what is the strategy, which is so much of what we do in the mid-market. We've got to be able to understand and make rapid decisions, back those decisions and execute those decisions. Whereas in some of these much larger organizations, those things just don't happen. You've just got to your point, sit in your cubicle and focus on the stuff that you've got to do, knowing that there's a whole range of software, external consultants, and a whole range of things that are getting done.
Yes. And sometimes it's the opposite, though, I've seen, Brad, is that they only understand doing the strategy. They've never had their hands in execution.
Yeah.
And a lot of mid-market companies, you're involved in strategy and execution. So they may have only been the theorist or the strategist and never actually been involved in execution. And when you ask them to get involved and coordinate with a design firm or coordinate with a media buyer, they're looking at you like you're crazy, because there was another department that did that. Sometimes these larger companies have project management departments who project manage that and pull all the different teams together. So the idea here is that look, there are amazingly talented people at small companies, medium companies, and large companies. And I am a big fan of, if we got a company that's, on 100 or 200 million a year of revenue, I'm a big fan of hiring someone from the 500 to $1 billion a year, if that's where we want to get, because they know stuff that we don't. Or, the team does. They can bring competency, but you got to do it with your eyes wide open, and that would be point number one, we've got an amazing 5-point list. I think it's 5 points, but that really to watch out for is we call it blinded by the light. You get so seduced and excited about this amazing brand in Vancouver, where I'm from. It's like, oh, they're from Lululemon, right? And Lululemon is a very successful company around the world, headquartered here in Vancouver. And there's a lot of great people there. But Lululemon has this kind of halo effect, and people think, oh, they're from Lululemon, therefore they must be amazing. Well, but Lululemon, not every single person is an A+.
And that's really what we're saying, is that you've got to be able to separate the brand where they worked from the individual. You've got to be able to say, okay, so they worked for Lululemon or Facebook or insert any name, but what is it? And this really speaks to a broader point around hiring, which is deal lust. And that is when you can get blinded because you think this candidate is so good, and it's like everything has to align with us getting that candidate. It doesn't matter how it brings us away from our systems or processes. It doesn't matter how much we have to pay them. I've just got to get that candidate. That deal lust is a real big problem. And so if you look at a company, let's use the Lululemon example, and you say, well, they must be fantastic because Lululemon is a fantastic brand. They could do amazing things in our company. There is no necessary logic within that statement.
There's a huge leap of faith or ignorance, to be more accurate, within that statement. It's interesting. One of our clients, we hired quite a few people from Lululemon. Actually, one of my key members, Tim, on my team is from Lululemon. He was, drove a lot of internal projects there and knows the company well. And they have some amazing people. They do. They absolutely do. But not all of them. And more than that, they may not be amazing for the specific job and the culture of your company, because they're used to working a certain way. And we hired, actually interesting, from Lululemon, we hired an amazing executive from Lululemon. This person was excellent in a lot of ways. But there were gaps because, Lulu was, a number of times bigger than the client that we hired the person in. But there are also gaps. So the first point is, don't get blinded by the light. Don't assume that because they're from an amazing brand, they're amazing. Every company has weak players, and people become weak if they're moved into the wrong kind of job or the wrong kind of environment. Even the best A+ can become mediocre if they're not put into the right place.
If they're an A player at another company, there's no guarantee, if it's a large company, that they would be an A player in a mid-market company. Okay.
Yes.
That's a really important point. That they might only be able to be an A player or highly successful in a really large company.
Yeah. I think I worked with a CFO once, and he was decent for the role that he was in because it was a very large company, but he didn't do anything. He was probably one of the laziest people I've ever seen in a job. Seriously.
Yeah.
He was there to hold governance. But he didn't drive anything, do anything. And then the position he was in, he was like, okay. For a number of reasons, it was probably okay for the stage of that company at that time. And he had incredible experience and lots of other things. But you put him into a mid-market company and he would be horrible. Like, he needs 10 people to delegate stuff to constantly because he doesn't do anything himself.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't work. And that's an extreme example because he wouldn't want the job. But so the first thing is we got to start by thinking, well, it's interesting that they come from Lululemon or Apple or Microsoft or Google. That's interesting. Doesn't mean anything, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like saying they met the Queen of England once. Wonderful. Doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything about them.
It doesn't.
And no. And it kind of takes us to our second point. And we touched on a little bit with that marketing manager, but all job titles are not created equally. just because it sounds the same. My gosh. I mean, job titles is a whole crazy field just into itself. Like I've seen, the amount of different things in job titles and how the variance of it and how they can mean dramatically different thing. But you've really got to understand what was the work they did.
What were they responsible for?
Yes. How did they make decisions? Did they make decisions on strategy or only execution? Did they make, were they just executing what they were told? Were they figuring it out? Or did they just do strategy, but have no sense of how the execution worked? Like, really, what did their job? So basically, you have to think about them like an assembly line worker. And what was the job they did? Did they make the boxes? Did they input the raw ingredients? Did they clean the equipment, maintain the equipment? Were they doing quality control? Were they doing just grunt manual labor, or were they doing the finesse part of the labor? You got to look through the factory and see where were they, and the skills and the movements and the judgments they learned how to make. Will those skills, movements, and judgments actually fit or be similar enough to fit within their skill set in a new role?
Yeah, if there's a title, for example, manager of customer service, it could mean so many different things. It could mean I was out the front working on the till, taking people's money. It could mean I was the person who was accountable for all customers. I answered every customer. Or it could mean I was the person that set the customer strategy and this customer experience through our website, through our personal interactions, a whole range of things. So it's got to be.
It could mean that I dealt with the easy calls. It could mean I dealt with the escalated calls. It could mean I only did email on chat. Like it could mean so many things, or it could mean that it can mean so much. You really, really got to know, what did that title mean? What was the work that they did? All you're trying to do is, if we go back to bird watching and basketball, bird watching, badminton, or basketball, let's say, those are three they all got to be, and they all involve humans. But it's like, if they're conditioned for bird watching, they might not be good at basketball, right? Or at badminton. And you got to realize what is different about the environment and the role compared to the environment they're in. And you got to see if there's a transition. Whether they want to or not is interesting. They might not be making a good choice. They might be running away from something. They might be running to something. They might have family pressure. They might have had bad advice. Who knows? So their desire is different than their track record. So, and this is why too, in a lot of, for our clients, we use a methodology called top grading, which helps us to have discipline around this. We have a client right now that's looking to hire, interestingly, a customer service manager. And what's happening is that as we define the role, what we're finding is that the type of person that there's a lot of people that could do that job. But now that we're getting into the granularity of defining that role, it's getting clearer and actually easier to find the candidate, because we're looking at the type of work that they do. What do they do on the factory floor? They're doing mental work instead of physical work. It's actually making it a lot easier. We use this thing called a scorecard and top grading that really helps you to get clear on it. And then what you're looking for.
So it's about the process. Like the process is what really matters. And you've got to avoid, like we said earlier, this deal lust. We've got to make sure that we understand, this is the second point still, that job titles, that you can remove the inequality of job titles and understand what's really happening. Because you and I have both been in the situation where we're doing strategic planning. A new person has come into that environment and it's completely unfamiliar. It's like we're all speaking English and they're speaking Japanese. And they're like, and it slows everything down. And it's only at that point that people begin to recognize these key characteristics. Like you said, you were the general manager over at Facebook or Apple, but we're beginning to see what you really did because we're all on this different page to
Yeah.
you.
The general manager job there and here are like Earth versus Mars. They're not even
Yeah.
comparable, but that's, again, the onus is on us to understand that. So again, all job titles not created equally. Check. Got that. Now, ensuring the skills are transferable and relevant in the mid-market. We were kind of touching on that a bit there already, but is what they have learned how to do and how they've learned how to do it helped. Like, for example, we have uh, a prime example of someone that we work with, and they hired a logistics person. They were kind of home baking logistics. They
Yeah.
recruited a logistics person who had been not only taken their education in logistics, but they'd been in a company that moved many more shipments than they moved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it made a massive difference to their business because they brought a professional. Interesting. As a side note, I'm going to be careful how I tell the story because it might be a little bit confidential. A friend of a friend
Mm.
um, um, works with a very large company that moves a lot of stuff around, and they hired, I believe, a vice president or an executive from one of the big courier companies, like a FedEx or a UPS or something like that.
Yeah.
They hired that person, paid them a salary that, as much as, many humans would make in a decade or two, was his annual salary.
Yeah.
And he more than paid for himself in like almost instantly
Yeah.
because he was the master of masters of logistics,
Yeah.
because he worked for, FedEx, UPS, those companies are masterful logistics companies. So, you know, uh, a mountain of a salary on an annual basis, more than paid for himself, because he came in and made changes. And I'd love to tell you some of the stories, but I'm probably not supposed to share them.
Don't
But
share.
this is a conversation over a beer, a virtual beer. But yeah, just amazing. So and it turned out to be an amazing fit for the company, because that experience, that this guy had spent his career learning and mastering logistics, and his ideas, he had simple ideas
Mm.
that would blow your mind.
Yeah.
So simple, but he was
Yeah.
a master. So there are great examples when those things work out and it translates directly.
Yeah.
And in that case, transfers, even though it got paid an incredible salary, one of the highest salaries I have heard. But it translated right to the bottom line because he could save them a fortune on that one line item.
But that doesn't always happen. That's good. It
Mhm.
can work. But I reckon they would have gone through a comprehensive process to make sure they got the right person. Here's another quick story. There was a company in the construction field that I worked with. They were a mid-market company, and they hired someone from a much, much, much larger company who was very much down. He wasn't even really running projects. He ran the team that went in to clean up the mess. So imagine you've got a construction project and it
Yep.
turns to custard. Well, he would assemble a crew and go and fix that project. He was Mr. Fix It. So this CEO decided to hire this person. They came in to be COO, Chief Operating Officer, for this small mid-market company. Came in, and this person had no idea about leadership outside of their own field. Like they were okay, but in
Yep.
terms of the whole company, no idea around strategies, and everything that we were doing was completely unfamiliar because all they did was in their very, very, very small window. They didn't get an insight into financials or impact of financials or anything like that. Everything was new, but they thought because they were hiring someone with a title from one of these this was a very large company
Right.
they'd hired them from, that it was going to work. And it just didn't. It just didn't.
Why didn't it work? What went wrong?
Well, because they didn't follow the top grading process that we'd put in, because they got deal lust. Everything that we're saying here, that's why. Because they said this person, if they can succeed in this environment, like this person will be good. And it ended up, I'll tell you, it ended up so badly. Okay, the new hire, who was the COO of the company, got their company vehicle, put all of their stuff in it, went to the yard at 2 a.m., okay, locked the keys in the car on purpose, and then went away and then sent an email at 2 a.m. saying, I resign, like, you'll never ever see me again. Goodbye.
Really?
Really? That's how the person resigned after a number of days missing in action. That's a
special person.
This person was supposed to lead the operations department and team, and that's how they went missing in action, and that's how they wrapped it up.
You're making me think of other ones, Brad. I'm thinking of other ones. Oh my gosh, the pain in these stories. I was actually on the phone today about one of these that's at play right now. This one's different, and you and I would both know it's a very risky one, but it's an entrepreneur that's working inside of somebody else's business and trying to find exactly. An entrepreneur who ran their own companies for a couple of decades, working inside another business. That's, entrepreneurs are used to making the rules and not following the rules and making rules for other people. But when they're inside a company that's got process and policy and rules, it's a tricky situation. They have a lot of skills, but they're also used to calling their own shots and not having a boss. And
it's like when my young daughter brings me mud cakes made out of sand and water, and she says, look, why don't you try this? They're really tasty. They look good, but they're not going to be tasty. Like that situation. I don't know how that's ever going to work. An entrepreneur needs to, they need to call the shots.
What generally, as most of us entrepreneurial people say, is that we're not employable.
Yep.
Right. And the other one that I've seen, actually, interestingly, and sometimes it does work, but it's consultants becoming operators. It's very different. Another company that I worked with, it was actually a company that I said, I basically said, we need to stop. You're not getting your money's worth, because they were stuck. There's some decisions the CEO wouldn't make, but one of them, they had hired a consultant, and how they missed this in their hiring process, I don't know. But they hired a guy who was working as a consultant to come in and run their operations. It's not even, and he came from a big company and had all the right kind of stuff, but just didn't match. And they just missed the fact of it's very different activities, consulting on stuff versus running a bunch of people doing it. So look there's lots of examples that the fact is, can the skills transfer to what you do? And they often can. And then and when they can't, it's a mess, because the person is going to fail and feel like a failure.
But that's the question to be answered. Sorry, that's the question to be answered. Like, it doesn't matter. You have to be able to look at it and say, what is the job description? What is the job scorecard, going back to top grading, right?
Yeah.
And is this transferable? Like, this person was running this fix-it team. Can this person run that? And if you skip over all of these things, if you don't know if they're transferable skills, it may not work. So let's move on to number 4.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one. Can they be fast, nimble, and accountable? So another way to look at that, in mid-market, we do a lot of what we'd call gut and go. So we've got to gut it out. We've got to figure it out quickly and go with it and execute it, compared to the bureaucracy that is critical to run a large business. You've got people supporting you everywhere you look in their own functions, and you own your little area. Can they be fast, nimble, and accountable?
Yeah, and it's different. I mean, the pace that a lot of the mid-market companies that we work with, stuff happens quite quickly. especially when they're moving into a new market or a new product or things like, they have to, there's a good old saying. It's like, it's building the plane while you're in the air. Like you're
Yeah.
in the air and you're figuring a lot of stuff out. Systems don't work properly, et cetera, et cetera. Even some companies are in 250, 300 million. There's still lots of this going on, that kind of revenue. And you can't get a consultant to go do a research report on everything.
Yeah.
You can't do a study. Sometimes you just got to do stuff. And some people can't thrive in that environment, and some people love it. That's why, by the way, some of the best people that come and drop into the mid-market companies, they might have been working in a big multinational or a wildly successful, and they come into a smaller organization. They want to move faster and be nimble and bring all the awesome learning that they've had. So the best ones love that. Some of the ones that don't thrive are kind of are used to that, and they don't want to take the risk, because there's working in a mid-market company, in many cases you're taking some more risks sometimes,
Yeah.
because you're just making a guess at your best guess and giving it a shot and then
I had this
figuring it out.
I had this one leader on the leadership team, and they'd come from, in this same scenario, they'd come from a very large organization, and we were in a workshop. And after day one, the person said, "It's like I've spent my whole career at the side of the basketball court watching the game, and now for the first time, I'm in the game. Like I'm actually playing the game." That was really interesting to see.
Yeah.
Um, just a different kind of take. This person was finding it really hard, of course, because like you said about bird watching versus basketball, like they were drawing on a whole range of things that they'd never done before, to the point, can they be fast, nimble, and accountable? You can't get an external agency to help with this particular project. You can't go and do a large, research study to support your decision necessarily. Like sometimes you've just got to go with your gut and be accountable to it, and then make the best decision on the fly. And that's really important.
Yeah, and the great news is bringing people that come in from a more sophisticated company can bring more discipline and rigor to your thinking. You still want to probably get it done in a month instead of a year, that's all. But they can bring some quality thought to these processes.
Yeah, yeah. In a large company, they have the ability to simply throw more bodies at a problem, whereas we often don't. We need to get in the mid market. We've got to get stuff done with
Yep.
often limited resources. We can't just either grow or solve problems by just throwing more and more and more bodies at it to get stuff done. So
Yep.
can they be fast, nimble, and accountable? That's number 4. So let's move on to number 5. Kind of wraps it up a little bit, I guess. And that is, let a fact finding and comparing hiring process make the decision. So you mentioned top grading, kind of best practice in this area. There are definitely other hiring processes that are very effective as well. But the thing that they've got in common is that they're very effective, right? We trust the
Yes.
process to make the decision. We
Yeah, and it's a factual approach. At the end of the day, is slow down, figure out what the job needs, and we've touched on this a bunch already, and then see how the person measures up to give them the best chance of success. Again, we love top grading, and a shout out to Brad Smart, who wrote the book, and Chris, who runs the company now, who we talk to quite a bit. We're going to do a session with them actually coming up soon. I'm going to do a session on a training on top grading again. We should do them once a year. COVID threw off earlier this year because the methodology is amazing. It was interesting. There's in that methodology, you come to this thing called a scorecard, where you define the job, about what are the outcomes they're accountable for, and you rate people on 50 different competencies. Basically, it's like thinking about the factory floor. What are the different skills you need to have for the different jobs? In the packaging job, you need these skills, and in the raw material department, these skills, in the maintenance department, you need these skills. Just thinking about that for any job. Um, and you really define the role. And it helps a lot to really it helps you to get clear, so you know what the hell you're looking for. Most job descriptions are too generic to get there, but that scorecard saves your butt. It also tells you that if they don't have them, how likely it is that particular skill can be learned, which
Mm-hmm.
is fascinating. As an optimist who believes in people, knowing what to believe in and what can't be changed is also very helpful. So, what's interesting, and like when we still make bad decisions. I had a call recently with, a hire that didn't work out, and we went back and we looked at the top grading report, because ideally we write a report after the hire. In most cases, the hiring people do that. What's interesting? Even all of the things in the report said this person wouldn't work. It said why they wouldn't work. And what played out is those exact things. So even though we had a perfect fact finding process, somehow the hiring manager was suggesting and saying that this person was an A player. But I remembered the report and I said, can we pull up the report? The report said don't hire. And then they hired. So they went through the perfect process. Proper job scorecard, proper interview and digging in. They found this person probably wouldn't be successful. Now,
Yeah. Yeah. Wait. What was that hiring manager's KPIs? Like, how did they define, and you maybe don't know this, but how did they define success in that role? Was it about the number of placements?
yeah, I don't think it was a KPI that screwed this up. I think there was just some pressure, and they just, they were choosing between two candidates, neither of which I think would have been ideal. Personally, I think they got caught up in the conversation and didn't go back and look at the data.
So they didn't follow the process.
They followed the process, but when it came to decision time, they didn't go back and review it at the last moment. The report might have been looked at a month before that or 6 weeks before that, and I think they lost their connection with it.
About 14 years ago, I needed a store person, a person who would come in and handle the stock for our business, handle the software, the incoming and outgoing goods, and manage all of the stock in the warehouse. And it was the first person we'd hired, the first time we'd hired that role. So we built the job scorecard and we went out to the market and we had about 45 people apply for that role, and none of them met the competencies required in the job scorecard. So I went to the HR manager and I said, go back to the market. And we went back to the market and we still didn't get someone. And the third time we went back to the market and we finally got someone. Now, this person came in and they owned the role. They transformed the storeroom and all of our stock. We knew where most things were. So yeah, if you don't get the right person that meets the competencies of the job scorecard, you've got to go back to the market. You've got to go back to the market. And that's
if
why
you're
I asked the
mining
question.
for gold and there's no gold in your pan, you don't try and go sell the chunk of granite for $1,000. A chunk of granite is not gold. It doesn't work. So you got to keep on panning, or you got to find a new spot. And I've had one company I worked with, we went through 35 candidates to get a CFO. Another company I was with last week, we had our 1-day strat planning, went through all the businesses in the group of companies this one client owns. We've got the best teams we've ever had. For 3 years, we've been upgrading the key leaders in the company, and we have the highest percent A players we've ever had. But damn, it's hard. It's really hard. But they've been following the process and getting better and better hires. Shockingly, they're getting better and better results. But
short-term pain equals long-term gain. It's a little bit
yes,
harder. Like it's hard to get the right people, but the payoffs are enormous in the mid to
y-
long term.
yeah. But you know what's harder? Working with people who aren't good at their jobs and knowing you put someone into the wrong job, knowing you made the mistake.
Yeah.
And that's why we're both big. The people make a business.
Yeah.
And for most of our clients, we are just doubling down on getting the right people in the right jobs. And most companies are not good at that. And our companies um are very good at that. It makes a big difference. And it's hard. If we go back to this last point, you need that fact finding hiring process. That, like, again, if you find something better in top grading, let me know. First of all, let us know. I don't know that anything exists, but the more facts that you gather and the more, and you're comparing what do they need versus the job, you're going to be way more successful, and so will they.
Yes. Trust the process. Get the right hiring process and trust it. And it doesn't matter where the person is or was working. You've got to trust the process. We'll eliminate them if they're not going to be the right fit. The process should override the the way that you feel about the company that they have worked
Yes.
at.
Yes.
Process should make the decision, not where they used to work or what their role was or how
Yeah.
much they earned or who they're married to or anything. Like,
Or who referred them to you. Just
yes,
because one of your A player team members refers them doesn't mean this person's going to be an A or an A in that role. So, we got some really good stuff here. The root of it is, I think we've both seen where people get blinded by that light. They get blinded by the brand or the company the person comes from. We get all excited. Hey, they come from this XYZ amazing company. They will be awesome. And they may and they may not. So we got to stay discerning in our approach. So while we kind of review these 5 key things. So number 1, blinded by the light. Don't attribute the success of the company to them. 2, all job titles are not created equally. Marketing manager can mean 25 different things, and it can actually be very different jobs, and as every other title can be. The COO is another one that can be all kinds of different jobs. All of them probably. Ensure the skills are transferable, and relevant in your company, because they have skills. I'm sure they do, even if they're a high performer where they are. But can they translate those into your environment and your culture and the dynamics of your business? Can they be fast, nimble, and accountable? As companies get to be really large, sometimes it's less so. Or if they are, they're maybe not fast and nimble, but they really grind out one little piece of the business.
mhm.
And can that come and work in yours? And then finally, the fact finding. Have a solid hiring process. Um, that finds and digs into the facts and really says, do they match? Are they a badminton player and you've got a badminton team? Great. Are they a badminton player, but you really need a bird watcher? Well, that's
Yeah.
probably going to be a problem. And bird and birdie. There is a birdie in badminton, but it's a very different thing, and it's used very, very differently than bird watching. I guess you could actually say badminton players are also bird watchers. They just have a very different approach to the bird watching. That was
Yeah.
almost funny, Brad.
It was almost,
Almost. Yeah.
but not quite.
No.
That was awesome. Yeah. So in closing, don't get blinded, right? Let the process, have a good hiring process. The process will take you there. Just because they worked at a famous brand that you're excited by doesn't mean anything. Don't let that give you a journey of pain. So thanks. That's been great. Thanks for listening. This has been the Growth Whisperers. Every week we talk about building enduring great companies. I'm Brad Giles, joined as always by Kevin Lawrence. You can find me at evolutionpartners.com.au and Kevin at lawrenceandco.com. Thanks for watching. Look forward to chatting next week.